All. So let us now move on to the inaugural session. And we are very fortunate to have with us for the inaugural sessions esteemed dignitaries, Professor G.K. Rath. Professor G.K. Rath needs no introduction. He is the Chief of National Cancer Institute, Jhajjar, Haryana, and Chief of IRCH, All India Institute of Medical Science. We have Dr. Rajesh Vasist. Dr. Rajesh Vasist is our President, AROI. And we have Professor S.K. Srivastav. Professor S.K. Srivastav is a former head of the Department of Tata Memorial Hospital, and now he is the Director of Radiation Oncology, ACG Cancer Institute, Mumbai. So to start the inaugural session.
And Dr. Syam is also President of FARO.
Yes, Dr. Srivastav is President of FARO, and Dr. Srivastav is my teacher. So now I invite Dr. Manish Pandey, who is the Program Director of Radon Conclave, to deliver the welcome speech. Dr. Manish Pandey, please.
सबसे पहले सबको नमस्ते और सबको बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद इस प्रोग्राम में, इस वेबिनार में आने के लिए। और ये वेबिनार की कुछ खास बातें हैं, कुछ खासियत है। ये वेबिनार केवल रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट के लिए हम लोगों ने आयोजित किया है और प्रोस्टेट कैंसर पर एस्ट्राजेनेका की सहायता से हम लोग ये प्रोग्राम कर रहे हैं। तो इसके लिए एस्ट्राजेनेका और कंपनी को भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। इस कार्यक्रम के माध्यम से रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट को जोड़ने का हम लोग का उद्देश्य था और इसीलिए एस्ट्राजेनेका ने भी एक प्रोग्राम मित्रा के नाम से शुरू किया हुआ है, जिसमें हम रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट की मदद से वो प्रोस्टेट कैंसर के पेशेंट्स की मदद करना चाहते हैं, जिससे जोराडेक्स इंजेक्शन उनके घर पे उनको मिलेगा, जिससे फिजियोथेरेपी उनको घर पे मिलेगी। आप सबको पता है कि कोविड के समय में थोड़े समय के लिए आकर के जोराडेक्स इंजेक्शन लगवाना या फिजियोथेरेपी के लिए हॉस्पिटल में आना पॉसिबल नहीं हो पाता है। इसी के साथ साथ वो पीएसए टेस्टिंग और डेक्सा स्कैन पर कुछ सब्सिडी भी देते हैं और पेशेंट एजुकेशन का बहुत बड़ा प्रोग्राम उनके बहुत सारी उन्होंने लीफलेट्स बनाई हुई है जो प्रोस्टेट कैंसर के पेशेंट को दी जाती हैं कि कैसे वो अपना जीवन यापन करें। इसलिए एस्ट्राजेनेका को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद और आप सभी रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। कुछ ज्यादा समय नहीं लूंगा, 2-3 बातें बता दूं। एक तो इस कार्यक्रम में केवल जैसे मैंने बोला कि हमने रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट को जोड़ने की कोशिश की थी। पहले ये प्रोग्राम 4 जोन्स पे अलग अलग लेवल पे किया गया, जिनका फ्रेमवर्क सेम रखा गया, टॉपिक सेम रखा गया और अभी थोड़े समय के बाद जैसे मान लीजिए ब्रैकीथेरेपी पे और एसबीआरटी पर जो डिबेट हुई, वो 4 जगह डिबेट अलग अलग हुई और ऐसे 4-4 स्पीकर्स दोनों की तरफ से सुनने वाले हमको मिले हैं। तो उनका एक वीडियो बना करके हम सबको भेजेंगे, जिससे हर विषय पर आप जो देश के प्रमुख प्रोस्टेट कैंसर में काम करने वाले रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट हैं, उनका व्याख्यान, उनके विचार सुन पाएंगे और उनको अपनी क्लिनिकल प्रैक्टिस में उतार के मरीजों को और अधिक सहायता पहुंचा पाएंगे। इस प्रोग्राम के माध्यम से जो हमने सीनियर रेजिडेंट्स को जोड़ा, जूनियर रेजिडेंट्स को जोड़ा, तो करीब करीब 75 देश के ऐसे इंस्टीट्यूशन और रेडिएशन सेंटर्स थे जहां तक हम पहुंचे और वहां के लोग इस पूरे प्रोग्राम में, जिसमें करीब 450 से भी ज्यादा रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट इस पूरे 5 प्रोग्राम में इन्वॉल्व हुए। तो मैं आप सबको, आप सबके सहयोग के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं और बिना विलंब किए हुए कार्यक्रम को आगे बढ़ाता हूं।
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. Now I request Dr. Munish Gorella, who is the chairman of Radon Conclave, to give a brief introduction of this conference. So Dr. Munish Gorella, please.
I think he is not able to join because he is traveling to Dehradun due to some personal reason. Okay. He told कि in between he will try to join, but at present he is not able to join. So proceed, please.
Okay. So now I invite Professor G.K. Rath for his inaugural speech. Professor G.K. Rath, please.
बहुत धन्यवाद, थैंक यू वेरी मच। एक तो मैं पहले बोलना चाहूँगा, ये जो हम इनागुरेशन सेशन रखा है, इसके नाम बदल के और कुछ करना चाहिए। मैं भी इंट्रोडक्शन, व्यूज, मैं इसलिए हिंदी में बोल रहा हूँ, आप सबको जान के हैरान होगी। हम सब बोलते हैं यस सर, सर, सर। किसी को ये पता है सर का फुल फॉर्म क्या है? SIR। सर मतलब स्लेव आई रिमेन। तो ये सब मैं सोच रहा हूँ थोड़ा सा इसको, स्लेव आई रिमेन, कब तक स्लेव रहेंगे, बहुत रह चुके हैं। तो मैं सोच रहा हूँ ये जो इनागुरेशन का शब्द है, मनीष जो है ना, और मनीष दोनों माहिर है हिंदी में। आई एम श्योर वो कुछ ना कुछ शब्द निकालेंगे, कुछ शब्द निकालेंगे इसके लिए, क्योंकि ये इनागुरेशन विद इन आवर ओन ग्रुप, इनागुरेशन थोड़ा फॉर्मेलिटी होता है, हम फॉर्मेलिटी में क्यों जाएं। दो शब्द बोल के बंद करूंगा। एक तो ये है कि प्रोस्टेट कैंसर आज से 10-15 साल पहले अगर लेंगे, हमारे यहाँ 36 पॉपुलेशन बेस्ड कैंसर रजिस्ट्री है इस मुल्क में, 36। इस 36 में प्रोस्टेट कैंसर टॉप 10 में कहीं नहीं था। बट अगर इस करंट लेटेस्ट जो कैंसर रजिस्ट्री रिपोर्ट निकला है फ्रॉम NCDR Bangalore, इफ यू सी दैट इन त्रिवेंद्रम प्रोस्टेट कैंसर नंबर 2 त्रिवेंद्रम में, नंबर 3 इन दिल्ली, नंबर 5 इन हैदराबाद। तो इसके मतलब है प्रोस्टेट कैंसर इज ग्रेजुअली इंक्रीजिंग। इसके वेराइटी ऑफ कारण वो आई थिंक बता चुके हैं। एंड ये जो डॉक्टर अमित बहल ने कंडक्ट किया, इट जस्ट से द लेवल ऑफ नॉलेज इज सो गुड। I mean, we are so happy by seeing the level of knowledge is really good. Number 2, ये जो मेरा always मैं जहाँ भी बोलता हूँ, मेरा एक weakness है towards prevention। हमारे कंट्री में 14 लाख न्यू कैंसर केसेस होते हैं, आउट ऑफ which 7 लाख है प्रिवेंटेबल। हम ये जो ट्रीटमेंट की बात करते हैं, ट्रीटमेंट की हम बात करते हैं ओनली फॉर ट्रीटेबल कैंसर्स। हालांकि प्रोस्टेट कैंसर प्रिवेंटेबल नहीं है, प्रिवेंटेबल है लाइक टोबैको रिलेटेड, इन्फेक्शन रिलेटेड। हम सबको थोड़ा, क्योंकि रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट आर दी ओनली ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट जो कि फुल टाइम करते हैं। मेडिकल ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट और कुछ करते हैं, सर्जिकल ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट ज्यादातर और कुछ भी करते हैं, बट हम लोग और कुछ करते नहीं, यही करते हैं। सो हमारा मेनली डायरेक्शन होना चाहिए टुवर्ड्स प्रिवेंशन ऑल्सो। प्रिवेंशन हम नहीं करेगा तो कौन करेगा? सो 50% कैंसर्स हमारे प्रिवेंटेबल है, so we must work towards prevention of these cancers also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Dr. Rajesh Vasisht to say a few words.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening to Dr. Rath and Dr. Shyam Srivastava. First of all, I congratulate to Dr. Manish and Manish both to connecting us due to this webinar. And now and thanks to AstraZeneca to involve with us. Now जैसे कि ये प्रोग्राम चल रहा है, लास्ट मैंने अमित बहल का सुना था क्वेश्चन, इट इज वेरी गुड के everyone, the resident, junior resident, senior resident and consultant part in the discussion. So it is very much needed, and this program is needed this corona time also. We are not connected each other, not changing our views. By this program, we can change our view and increase our knowledge. So all the best to all of candidates to increase. As Dr. Ras said, prostate cancer is increasing now. As you know, we are seeing the mostly breast and prostate cancer in maximum number in OPD radiation. So all the best to all the delegates and all participants, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Vasisht. Now I request Professor S.K. Srivastava to say a few words.
Fine, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. I think can you hear me? I think you can.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. आप कैसे सुना? आप सुनाई भी दे रहे, दिखाई भी दे रहे.
मैंने पीछे इसलिए फारो का लगा रखा है कि सबको फारो के बारे में पता रहे.
बाल सफेद किया है या अपने आप है, ये पता नहीं.
सफेद नहीं है वैसे,
इसमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं.
अभी गायब नहीं हुए हैं, इसलिए वो सफेद रखे हुए हैं अभी. अच्छा, सभी ने हिंदी में बोला तो मैं भी सोच रहा हूँ कि मैं भी हिंदी में बोलूं. और डॉक्टर मनीष ने जैसा कहा है कि पुरानी रिकॉर्डिंग आप देने वाले हैं, वो सबसे अच्छी बात है मेरे ख्याल में. जो डॉक्टर रथ इस बात से बिल्कुल सहमत होंगे. एक समय में जब इक्रो टीचिंग कोर्स शुरू किया था, तो उसके सारे रिकॉर्डिंग रखी हुई थी और वो काफ़ी यूजफुल रहे, काफ़ी जो है लोगों के लिए मददगार रहे. और मेरा ख्याल है आपका जो एक सुझाव है कि इनॉग्रेशन छोड़ करके उसका कुछ नाम जैसे स्वागत या कुछ कर दिया जाए तो ज़्यादा अच्छा रहेगा उसमें. एंड मैं आपसे पूरी तरह सहमत हूँ कि हमको अपनी लीडरशिप पोजीशन बनाए रखना है एक. और मैं यही कह रहा था कि अभी हम जैसे डॉक्टर मनीष और डॉक्टर मुनीश ने जो बनाया है कि भाई हम रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट के लिए एक फोरम है जिसमें आगे बढ़ सकते हैं, तो मैं ये भी चाहता हूँ कि कुछ दिनों जब हम ना करके फिर बाकी जो एशियन कंट्रीज हैं उसमें भी आगे बढ़ें, क्योंकि बहुत सारे लोग हमको सुनना चाहते हैं. और कई जगह मैं जब जा कर के देखता हूँ तो बहुत कम हैं, वो भी हमेशा यूरोप की तरफ ही देखते हैं कि यूरोप के ही लोग आकर के बता सकते हैं, जबकि हमारी और उनकी बीमारी करीब करीब एक सी है, हमारे उनके साधन एक से हैं। तो क्यों ना हम एक दूसरे से वही एक्सचेंज करें, चाहे वो बांग्लादेश हो, इंडोनेशिया हो, थाईलैंड हो, इन सब में ये लोग भी हमारे बात सुनना चाहेंगे। और अगर हम उनको अपने प्रोग्राम आगे पहुंचा सकें तो हमारी एक लीडरशिप पोजीशन भी बनी रहेगी। वो हमको जानते हैं, वो पहले कहते हैं कि हिंदुस्तान में लोग बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं। बड़े सौभाग्य की बात है कि आजकल जब हम अपने जो पब्लिश हो रहे हैं पेपर्स, वो काफ़ी लोग पढ़ रहे हैं। अभी थोड़ी देर पहले एक फारो का वेबिनार था, उसमें इंडिया के बारे में जो लेक्चरर थे जो कि इंग्लैंड से थे, उन्होंने कम से कम 10-15 बार नाम लिया होगा कि ये पेपर हिंदुस्तान से आया। तो क्यों ना हम इसको और आगे बढ़ाएं। तो ये आपका जो इसमें संकल्प है ये बहुत अच्छा है, और मैं रियली साधुवाद आपको देना चाहता हूँ कि जिस तरह से ये प्रोग्राम हुआ है, कुछ नई नई चीज़ें आ रही हैं। अभी जैसे थोड़ी देर पहले अपना जो प्रोग्राम हुआ था जिसमें कि ग्रुप डिस्कशन हुआ, ये बहुत ही कामयाब रहा, और मैं रियली धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ आपको और डॉक्टर मुनीश और डॉक्टर मनीष को। अमित ने बहुत अच्छी तरह से कंडक्ट किया, जिस तरह से प्रश्न पूछे और जिन बच्चों ने जवाब दिए, बहुत अच्छा लगा हमको कि इनमें एक कॉन्फिडेंस आ रहा है जो शायद हम अपने आप को देखते हैं 40 साल पहले वो हमें नहीं था कॉन्फिडेंस। तो अब धीरे से इन बच्चों में कॉन्फिडेंस आ रहा है। ये कुछ दिनों में आगे बढ़ के हमारे जो हैं एम्बेसडर रहने वाले हैं और आगे ये बहुत अच्छा काम करें। तो ये प्रोग्राम चालू रखिएगा और आगे करते ही रहना चाहिए इस तरह की चीज़ें। और दूसरी बात एक और मैं कहना चाहता हूँ इसमें, हालांकि चूंकि आपने कहा कि ये सिर्फ रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजी के लिए है, तो आजकल मैं धीरे धीरे देख रहा हूँ कि मेडिकल ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट और सर्जिकल ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट थोड़े एक अलग ही डायरेक्शन में जा रहे हैं। वो अपनी एक सुप्रीमेसी प्रूव करना चाहते हैं। तो हमको इससे ऊपर उठ के आना है। अलग अलग कारण हो सकते हैं, वो अपनी सुप्रीमेसी दिखाने के लिए शायद मरीज रेडिएशन ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट को एज ए प्राइमरी डॉक्टर नहीं मानता। वो ज़्यादातर जाते हैं तो वो सीधे मेडिकल ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट को कहते हैं वो ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट हैं, और सर्जिकल ऑन्कोलॉजिस्ट के बाद आते हैं, उसके बाद वो पेशेंट हमारे पास आते हैं। लेकिन अगर इस तरह की जो हमने प्रोग्राम किए जिसमें कि हमारे आने वाली जनरेशन काफ़ी स्ट्रॉन्ग रहेगी, चाहे वो सब्जेक्ट के बारे में हो, हमारे विषय के बारे में हो, या हमारी डिबेट की ताकत के बारे में हो, तो शायद हम लोग काफ़ी अच्छे उड़ेंगे। तो ये ज़रूरी है कि हम इसमें आगे बढ़ें। ये प्रोस्टेट का बहुत अच्छा रखा है आपने। मैं सोच भी रहा था कि प्रोस्टेट ये तो कुछ कॉमन कैंसर है, कुछ अनकॉमन कैंसर के बारे में भी रखना चाहिए, कि कभी कभी वो भी बड़े काम के होते हैं जब हम उनके बारे में डिस्कस करते हैं अपनी मल्टी डिसिप्लिन टीम में या कहीं पर, तो वो बहुत काम की चीज़ होगी आगे आके। और मुझे लग रहा है कि ये जो डॉक्टर मनीष है, आपके साथ मैंने कई प्रोग्राम पहले भी किए हैं, ये रियली इनका जो लेवल है, काफ़ी स्तर जो है काफ़ी ऊंचा उठता जा रहा है, और ये बहुत अच्छी और बहुत खुशी की बात है। और मेरी तरफ से आपको सबको धन्यवाद और सारी शुभकामनाएं कि आगे चल के और भी आगे बढ़े और काफ़ी नाम कमाए। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद जो आपने हमको मौका दिया है आने की। थैंक यू।
Thank you, sir, for your blessings. Now, after the inaugural session, let us move on to the academic program. And we have very exciting sessions ahead. And for the first session and first lecture, I invite the chairpersons, Dr. Tejinder Kataria, who is the chairperson of Radiation Oncology in the Medanta, the Medicity, Gurgaon. Dr. Ramesh Bilimaga, who is Head Regulatory Affairs, come Senior Consultant Radiation Oncologist, Healthcare Global Enterprise Hospital, Bangalore. And Dr. Virendra Bash, who is the Professor and Head of MGIMS Sevagram. So now I request Professor Virendra Bash to introduce the first speaker.
Dr. Virendra Vyas is not able to join, so Dr. Ashok has joined, who is Head of the Department of Radiation Oncology at R&R Hospital.
So I request Dr. Ashok to introduce the speaker for the first lecture.
Thank you very much. And at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Manish Pandey and Dr. Manish for giving this opportunity. And without wasting any further time, let's get on with the sessions. So the first topic is evidence-based use of radiotherapy in oligometastatic prostate cancer. And our eminent speaker is Dr. Indraneel Malik, who is Senior Consultant Radiation Oncology at Tata Medical Center in Kolkata. Dr. Indraneel Malik, you can start the session right now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
At the outset, while I share my screen, I would like to thank the organizers, Dr. Manish, Dr. Munish Gairola, and pay my respects to the senior faculty and chairpersons. So this topic of evidence-based radiotherapy in metastatic prostate cancer, oligometastatic prostate cancer, is really interesting. Because if you think about it, prostate cancer is one of the few cancers where there seems to be a role of radiotherapy from the earliest stage to advanced, oligometastatic or metastatic disease, which is, which produces amongst the best results. So it is never a secondary treatment in prostate cancer. It has shown its mettle in all stages of prostate cancer. Now, the questions that we have for the evening is, how do we define the number, risk, and volume to stratify metastatic prostate cancer? What is the role of prostate-directed treatment and the role of metastasis-directed treatment in this disease? Now, to understand the role of radiotherapy in prostate cancer, we have to understand how metastatic prostate cancer is stratified. Now, the concept of oligometastasis that we have in other diseases is not strictly followed in prostate cancer. One of the reasons being that in prostate cancer, much of the metastasis is in bones, where it is genuinely difficult to count the exact number of metastases. And, bones can be, there may be large metastases in bones, small metastases in bones. So unlike other diseases, the concept of oligometastasis is a bit different in prostate cancer. And in fact, there is no formal cutoff for oligometastasis. So in a study where experts were asked what they understood to be oligometastatic prostate cancer, the experts voted, 14% said 2 metastases, 66% said 3 metastases, a few said 5 metastases. So it was really a very varied response. Now, in addition to that, there are several other factors to consider when you consider oligometastasis in prostate cancer. Prostate cancer being a cancer which has a long natural history, we need to understand whether the metastases are synchronous or metachronous. What are the number of lesions? Can we count them? Can we size them? What are the sites? Are these bone lesions, nodal lesions, visceral metastases? Is this happening in a castration-naive patient or a castration-resistant patient? And what kind of imaging method are you actually using to stratify or count your metastases? Till very recently, prostate cancer metastatic workup consisted mainly of a bone scan, where you really can't go counting metastases on a bone scan. So when you define oligometastatic disease in prostate cancer, the imaging method is also very important. And now with the advent of very good nuclear imaging techniques, namely the PSMA PET-CT scan, the concept of oligometastases and oligometastasis-directed treatment has taken a new meaning. Now, we have different types of stratification in prostate cancer metastatic disease. In the Latitude study, the high-risk criteria consisted of at least 2 of either Gleason score more than or equal to 8, 3 bone more than or equal to 3 bone metastases, visceral metastases. Whereas in the Charted study, high volume disease in metastatic castrate-sensitive prostate cancer was considered to be bone metastases, which were 4 or more, plus at least 1 beyond the spine or pelvis, and or visceral disease, which was non-nodal. Now, if you take a moment to pause and think about these volume-based classifications, and remember that both the latitude and the charted criteria were really criteria for systemic therapy. So if you look at it, this is not a criteria strictly for oligometastatic disease the way we know it in other cancers, because it doesn't really count the number and size only. It counts where it has happened. And at least in the charted criteria, it leaves out nodal metastases as a whole. So nodal metastases is not counted in the bone or visceral disease. So somebody, for example, could have a body full of nodal metastases for prostate cancer, but could still be classified as low volume or low metastatic burden disease. So this is important to understand when we look at the results of studies with prostate cancer and whether biologically this makes sense or not. Now, before we go into the role of radiotherapy, it is important to take a minute to look at the systemic therapy of metastatic prostate cancer. Systemic therapy of metastatic prostate cancer has evolved. There are now several, large randomized control trials. So we have evolved from ADT alone to at least a dual modality of treatment. So there are 2 large randomized control trials with docetaxel in addition to ADT, the CHARTED and the STAMPEDE trial. There are 2 large randomized control trials of abiraterone in addition to ADT, which is the LATITUDE and the STAMPEDE trial. There's also evidence for apalutamide and enzalutamide. So really, metastatic prostate cancer treatment is now at least 2 systemic modalities. And very recently in ASCO 2021, the preliminary results of one of the questions of the PEACE-1 study was presented, where they showed that in addition to androgen deprivation therapy and docetaxel, an addition of abiraterone right from the beginning produced an immense benefit. In fact, the progression-free survival nearly doubled when we added abiraterone to standard of care with either ADT alone or ADT in addition to docetaxel. So it seems that in the future, we are going to consider ADT, docetaxel, and abiraterone as first-line standard of care treatment in metastatic disease. Of course, the final results of this study are awaited, so we don't know how to sequence them absolutely perfectly now, but this is a very important question. Now, coming to the fact that does radiotherapy have a role to play in metastatic prostate cancer? The first question we will discuss is whether there is any benefit of prostate-directed radiotherapy. So in metastatic disease, is there any benefit of giving radiotherapy to the prostate only? Now, why would that be a consideration? Usually in metastatic disease, we do not concentrate on treating only the primary site, but we know biologically that the stem cells in the primary often primes metastatic sites and causes continuous proliferation by secretion of cellular and humoral factors. That cancer cells from metastatic sites can return to the primary tumors, and cells from metastatic sites can intermingle via humoral factors. So even if there is metastatic disease, the primary site continues to play an important role. And in a landmark paper in the Lancet, in Nature in 2015, Gundem et al. Looked at the genetic diversity of nodal or of metastatic disease in prostate cancer in a group of patients, and they found that these metastatic sites are highly heterogeneous in terms of their genetic makeup, and it seems that the genetic makeup continuously changes. So the primary continues to influence metastasis, the metastasis continues to influence the primary, and there's a lot of intermingling of genetic changes. So it's important to consider the primary site as an important factor in the control of prostate cancer, even when it is metastatic. Now, retrospective large database analysis had already shown that prostate-directed treatment may be useful. So there were analyses from the National Cancer Database in the UK, in the US, the SEER database, and they all showed that local therapy whether it is radical prostatectomy or radiotherapy, was associated with a reduction in disease-specific survival in prostate cancer. This was followed by the HORAD study, which was the first randomized control trial to see prostate-directed radiotherapy. And this study, recruited patients who had a PSA of 20 and bone metastases, randomized 432 patients to ADT alone or ADT plus radiotherapy, and the doses are shown in the graph. So you can see that it was 70 grain 35 or 57.7 in 19 fractions. Now they took patients of all kind of metastatic categories. The median PSA was high, and 2/3 of the patients had more than 5 osseous metastases. So they found that there was no benefit in prostate-directed radiotherapy overall. But in their subgroup analysis, there seemed to be a hint that if the number of metastases was small, less than 5 in particular, there seemed to be a hint that maybe this is the group that we should be looking at, although the overall study was negative. This was followed by the STAMPEDE trial, the STAMPEDE Arm H, where metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer was randomized to standard of care, which was androgen deprivation with or without docetaxel, or standard of care with radiotherapy to the prostate, 55 grain 20 fractions or 36 grain 6 fractions once a week. Now, because of the multi-arm, multi-stage design of the STAMPEDE study, initially the standard of care was ADT alone, but somewhere in the middle of the study, docetaxel was proven to be better, the addition of docetaxel, and docetaxel also was included as standard of care in 18% of patients. Now, based on when the HORAD study was first reported, the STAMPEDE trialists realized that they need to look at the low volume or low metastatic burden disease specifically. So they changed their protocol based on the charted trial criteria of high metastatic burden. And they decided in their protocol, in their modified protocol, that they would look at the low metastatic burden or differentially look at the high and low metastatic burden separately. If you look at the patient criteria of the STAMPEDE study, looking at prostate-directed treatment, about 64% were node-positive patients, about equally distributed between low and high metastatic burden. 83% had high Gleason score, about 18% received docetaxel, and the two types of radiotherapy schedules were nearly equally distributed. They found that overall, in the whole group, there was no benefit in overall survival, which was the primary endpoint. However, the failure-free survival improved by about 25%. When they looked at the high metastatic burden and low metastatic burden separately, they found that there was a significant benefit in overall survival from 73% to 81% with radiotherapy in the low metastatic burden disease, as by the charted metastatic burden criteria. And favorably, they found that the RTOG grade 3 or 4 or the CTCA grade 3 was not a lot worse, which was very important because in metastatic disease, if you're not really improving outcomes, you do not want to cause additional toxicity. So with a moderate dose of radiotherapy, there was an 8% absolute benefit in 3-year survival in the low metastatic burden group. Now, to put it in context, this is approximately the same absolute benefit of abiraterone acetate and prednisolone in the STAMPEDE study, in the STAMPEDE abiraterone.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Indraneel. Can you please wind up fast?
Yes.
Because we are running out of time.
So the STAMPEDE secondary analysis showed that it was, 3 or 4 or less metastatic disease, which was beneficial. Now, the PEACE-1 study has a second question. In addition to, addition of abiraterone to docetaxel, it is also asking a question of addition of radiotherapy. And as far as prostate-directed treatment goes, we will find out whether radiotherapy is additionally beneficial when abiraterone is also added to the mix. The stopgap M1 meta-analysis combines the, the STAMPEDE and HORAD studies, and also finds that in the low metastatic burden disease, there is benefit. So there are other ongoing studies of prostate-directed radiotherapy, which I'm not going into. So as far as metastasis-directed radiotherapy is concerned, oligometastatic disease we know has a better prognosis. Several studies, support this. And the rationale for metastasis-directed radiotherapy is that it is proven for other tumors. It may reduce or prevent further metastatic spread and may allow delay in initiation of other treatments like ADT and consolidation agents. The SABRE COMET study, which was not specifically for prostate cancer, first set the ball rolling and found a big difference in overall survival in metastasis-directed radiotherapy with stereotactic treatments. The STOMP trial was a specific trial in prostate cancer radiotherapy. This was a phase 2 study, which was looking at whether the ADT-free survival, so whether we can delay ADT by giving metastasis-directed treatment, and it showed that we could delay ADT by approximately 8 months. And the 5-year ADT-free survival was a lot better with metastasis-directed radiotherapy. So initial results show that with metastasis-directed radiotherapy, you can delay the initiation of ADT in metastatic prostate cancer. The ORIOLE study is another phase 2 study, which looked at 6-month PFS, and it also shows a benefit. There are other ongoing trials of metastasis-directed radiotherapy in prostate cancer. In oligoprogressive, castration-resistant prostate
request you to kindly wind up, please.
Yes. In oligoprogressive disease, I'm just going to show you 2 retrospective studies which show that there could be a benefit in terms of giving radiotherapy to oligoprogressive sites in castration-resistant disease in terms of initiation of further treatment. So there are 2 large multi-institutional retrospective studies which vouch for that. So I'm going to, skip the node positive, slides. And to summarize, there is strong emerging role of radiotherapy in metastatic disease with strong signals on improved progression-free survival and overall survival. In newly diagnosed hormone-sensitive prostate cancer with oligometastatic presentation, there is strong evidence that in low volume metastasis or low metastatic burden disease, there is benefit in overall survival. In metastasis-directed therapy for oligorecurrent and oligoprogressive disease, there is phase 2 data for oligorecurrent disease, and oligoprogressive disease. There is retrospective evidence, cannot be considered standard treatment. But I am reasonably confident that in the near future, we are going to see results of randomized control trials which are showing benefit of radiotherapy in this setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Indranil, for such a lucid talk, and definitely in coming times, we will definitely see a role of radiation in oligometastatic disease. Do we have any questions from the audience, please?
Yeah, because we are running short of time, probably we can't take questions from the audience, but I request the chairpersons, Dr. Kataria and Dr. Bilimagga, to give their comments.
Yeah. Dr. Kataria, are you there?
Good evening, sir.
Okay. In fact, when I heard hearing Dr. Malik's talk, it is very, very apt that he has quoted the Greek philosopher's quote: for any scientific person to believe any science unless there is evidence and the demonstration, certainly, and he will be exposing himself for his ignorance and folly. Very rightly, he has made that apt statement in his brochure that I see. There are about 10 the studies which have already shown and demonstrated, because today it is possible to show the oligometastatic status, and because of the availability of the current imaging sciences. So with all that, and with the ongoing trials, 10 plus odd ongoing trials on the oligometastatic, days to come, and we'll be really seeing it another apart from the metastatic to the early in a prostatic cancer. In between, there will be an array of the prostatic cancer on which we can really tackle. And the days have gone when the disease used to spread and there is no treatment at all. That day has gone. Now there's evidence and there's a demonstration, and we can really believe the oligometastatic prostatic cancer is a treatable disease. Thank you, Malik. And it's a wonderful, the exposition of all the evidences that you have shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashok, and thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to this radiation oncology conclave. I must congratulate Indranil for collating the evidence over the last 10 years that has emerged for treatment of oligometastatic disease in different settings. Earlier, we would get the tail end of the patients when they are, at the end of their treatment, and the quality of life was to be preserved, so we would give some palliative radiation. But now it's a turnaround, and oligometastatic disease is one case where the patients may be considered, as of today with the evidence that's been presented, for upfront radiation in addition to their systemic treatment. So we'll eagerly await for the results of phase 3 trials, which are in the pipeline. And even if there is no overall survival, the freedom from disease and oligo progression, if that can be stopped, or even systemic disease, if that can be prevented, I would say that is a big step forward for radiation to have an effect in the oligometastatic carcinoma of prostate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairpersons, and thank you, Dr. Indranil, for the excellent talk. Now we are having a very exciting debate. The topic of the debate is, in the modern day, hyperfractionated radiotherapy should be the norm. And for the motion, we'll be speaking Dr. Shankar Vangipuram, who is the Senior Consultant Radiation Oncologist at Apollo Cancer Center, Chennai. And against the motion, we'll be talking Dr. Gagan Saini, who is the Director, Radiation Oncology, Max Healthcare, Delhi. And we have our judges, 3 eminent faculty of Radiation Oncology, Professor Manoj Gupta, who is President-elect ARY and Dean of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Rishikesh, Professor V.K. Kaushal, who is Senior Professor and Head of Radiation Oncology Department, PGIMS, Rohtak, and Professor Shalin Kumar, who is the Director of State Cancer Center, UP, and Professor and Head of ACPGIMS, Lucknow. Now I request the judges to start the debate session.
So thank you very much. Thanks, the organizer. And I think we should be straight away go to the debaters. So let me first invite Dr. Shankar, who is going to speak for the motion. Dr. Shankar, please.
Sir, for one speaker, time is 10 minutes and 1 minute for rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm not able to share my screen. Unshare Dr. Indranil's.
Now.
Is it visible now?
Yes, Shankar, it is visible. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Oh, at the outset, let me thank Manish and the organizing committee for giving me the opportunity to speak something on the current practices which all of us are routinely doing and the basis for the practice. So going back to the debate, there are a few questions that need to be addressed in localized prostate cancer. Do the trials really support the routine use of moderate hyperfractionation? And if so, what are the subgroups for whom we should be very cautious about? And what are the kind of groups where we can go for ultra hyperfractionation or extreme hyperfractionation? So all of us are pretty aware of the radiobiologic rationale. The low doses, you have alpha self-kill. At the high doses, it's the beta, and the point where both of them merge is the alpha-beta ratio. And when this alpha-beta ratio is small, then large, there is a small change due to the fractionation. But when the alpha-beta is kind of very large, then the fractionation has some kind of effect, biologic effect. Now let us put it into the context of the prostate cancer, the clinical data which is available with regards to the alpha beta ratio. Majority of the clinical data support the range of this particular parameter between 1.22 to 0.96. And more importantly, if you look into the prostate cancer, this essentially responds to fractionation more like late responding tissue rather than early responding tissue. So let us just fix the definitions of the hyperfractionation sizes that we are actually using in the clinic. Moderate hyperfractionation is essentially something which is between 240 to 350 centigrade, and ultra hyperfractionation is something which is more than 500 centigrade. So essentially there is a gap between 340 to 500, which is actually not used in many of the clinical trials. Now, if you look into this moderate hyperfraction clinical trials, initially it has come from several non-randomized clinical trials from Fox Chase, MD Anderson, and Italian. All these particular trials have provided a similar cancer control for a median follow-up duration ranging between 6 to 9 years. The difference was essentially non-significant. Now, when you're looking into the randomized trials data, the hyperfractionation, the size, the fraction size range between 2.5 to 3.5 gray per fraction. These were designed with objectives. There are two objectives. The number one is non-inferiority design, which gives us an advantage of convenience and economics. The second one was the hyperfractionation gives better results than conventional fractionation, which is a superiority design. If you look into the randomized control data, initially there were trials which were number of patients ranging between 200 to 300, and where the doses which were used range between 2.7 to 3.1 gray. And they have a very good follow-up. Having said that, all these clinical trials which you have seen in the initial part of the century, majority of them have said it's non-superior, non-superior. But now we have very robust clinical data, which has come from very good groups, include the CHIP, RTOG-NRG clinical trial and the HIPRO clinical trial, which were in 3,200 patients, 1,820. All these have a very good follow-up data of 5 years. I'm sure these were the publications which were done in 2018, the updated of publication of the CHIP trial. Also, the results were more or less same as what were published 3 years ago. Now, this major part of the moderate hyperfractionation practice was supported by the CHIP, PROPHET, and the NRG clinical data. Now, this is basically seen in more than 30,000 patient years of follow-up data. If you can see the CHIP trial, the doses which were used were around 300 centigrade. The CHIP and the PROPHET clinical trial have used 300 centigrade, and these were non-inferiority clinical trials, and that was the outcome in terms of tumor control and the late sequelae. If you look into the RTOG-NRG clinical trial, it was around the doses which were used were around 250 centigrade, and again that has shown a non-inferior. The outcome was essentially non-inferior in terms of tumor control and the late sequelae. The fact is the HIPRO trial, where the fraction size was the highest, which was 340 centigrade. And if we look into the outcomes, the late toxicity was kind of little high, and this is much more accepted when the doses which were prescribed were more around 340 centigrade. If you look into the risk stratification across all the randomized clinical trials which have been used, the treatment target was more or less prostate and seminal vesicle in all the clinical sites, all the trials which have been done. The dose constraints also are more or less the same and practiced across the clinical trials, different randomized clinical trials. So if you conclude the all the clinical trials, all the clinical trials which have been mentioned, they met the non-inferiority endpoint, and the hazard ratios were consistently across the studies, which is less than 1. Now the question is the follow-up long enough? With more than 30,000 patient years of follow-up in these 3 randomized clinical trials, that's a phenomenal follow-up data. Again, the superiority trials with halving of the biochemical failure at 5 years have not seen this to translate to substantial benefits in distant metastasis and the overall survival. Now, yes, if we conclude into the kind of follow-up, it looks perfect. Now, what about the high-risk prostate cancer? Because majority of the cases which have been selected were low risk and intermediate. Only CHIP as used. A few of the patients were high-risk groups. So I'm sorry, CHIP has included majority of the patients were low trial, high-risk men, and there is no evidence for significant interaction between the treatment effect and the risk group. The HIPRO trial, which you have seen in the high-risk group, again, there is no statistical evidence of heterogeneity across these groups. So evidence, what you see for this hypofractionation trial was more towards the low and the intermediate risk. Now, if you look into the toxicity, the acute toxicity was increased by 2 percentage points in the PROFIT and the CHIP. Again, this is acute, that's more than grade 2, but late is actually more or less equivocal across the 2 arms. In the NRG trial, you can see there is an increase, marginal increase in the grade 2 toxicity. But again, these are not really bothersome for the clinicians. As far as the PRO is concerned, which was analyzed the CHIP and the NRG trials, they were actually more or less equivocal. So overall, there is no significant increase in the late toxicity. Now, how do we project this toxicity in terms of longer follow-up? There is, interestingly, a trial which has been published from Princess Margaret Hospital with more than 10 years follow-up data. The cumulative incidence of grade 3 toxicity was 2%. The GI toxicity was 4% after 5 years, and grade 2 is around 9 to 12 at 5 to 8%. And again, all this are very much manageable. So if you look into the toxicity patterns, are there any patient subgroups to be really cautious with? There is no consistent effect which is seen for age, comorbidity, and anatomy. The treatment quality likely plays a larger role than the fraction schedule. The CHIP investigators noted around 50% reduction in the toxicity compared to the previous MRC trial.
1 minute.
The long-term follow-up of the, so I'm just completing it. So it's only 1 minute more, So in short, if you look into the hypofractionated data, it's more robust, I would say, with regards to the low and the intermediate risk group that we are treating. High risk, yes, if we are not including pelvic lymph nodes, it can be offered. And this has been the ASCO and AU evidence-based guidelines and supported by the same in the Cochrane library. And the extreme hypofractionation, the rationale, if you see, is not basically due to the low beta characteristic, but it's more because of the technological advances in the dose delivery. And we have seen the impressive results in the lung and brain, where the tumors are sandwiched between the functional subunits, which are more parallel. In prostate cancer, it is the rectum and the bladder, you can see. Majority of the ultra-hypofractionation data is non-randomized, and the 5-year biochemical free survival is ranging.
Shankar, wind up, please. Your time is over. Wind up, please.
So, yes, sir. So the same has been also concluded by the hypo-RTPC clinical trial, and this is more relevant in the intermediate risk group. So to kind of summarize, what are the important bottlenecks? There is really not much. The evidence is right there. There is technology. Everyone is familiar with the protocol. And this is my conclusion, where moderate hypofractionation is something which I would strongly advocate for low and intermediate risk prostate cancer patients, and the same even with the ultra hypofractionation based on the logistic needs of the patients. Thank you so very much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Shankar. Now I invite the other debater, Dr. Gagan, who is going to speak against the motion. So over to you, Dr. Gagan.
A very warm good evening to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Manish. Thank you, chairpersons, for having me here. The topic of my discourse is to talk against the motion of the House. I hope my slides are visible, sir.
Yes.
Yes. So the House motion is that in the modern day, hypofractionated radiotherapy should be the norm, and I shall be speaking against it. So first things first, radiation therapy is a curative option insofar as prostate cancer is concerned, and has the potential to overwhelm surgery for patients of CA prostate. So the results are more or less same. So we can't really go with our radiation therapy, treatments in a half-hearted way, just because this disease rears its ugly head after more than the regular number of years. It takes longer time. So we have to be very, very careful. And this is where I'm coming from in this debate. So Dr. Shankar has done an amazing analysis of all the, comparative trials. And, there is really nothing more to add there. And, but is hypofractionation a norm? It's not a norm. That's the House motion. That's what I'm talking about. This is the screenshot from NCCN, and I downloaded it yesterday or so. And you can see that moderate hypofractionation, insofar as this particular screen is concerned, they have mentioned it as a preferred option. Now, this is very interesting. They are supposed to explain what they advise in the discussion, and in the page number MS22, they talk about that overall the panel believes that hypofractionated, which is more convenient, can be considered as an alternative. So it's not a norm, it's an alternative. And then they quote the ASTRO AU evidence-based guidelines, and they are justifying the use of this thing as a preferred regimen based on that. So I think we should go to the ASTRO AU evidence-based guidelines, which have come after a thorough review of all the available literature published in 2018. So certainly has all these relevant trials as a part of its consideration. This was published in PRO. So we come to the results straight away. It's a very extensive paper. I will be talking about what is relevant to the debate, because this is a debate at the end of the day. So statement to key question number 1D, so which is about prostate cancer control outcomes, impact of patient age, comorbidity, anatomy, and urinary function. So the authors write that there is a limited follow-up beyond 5 years. They're very clear about it. They're saying, well, yes, you can advise it, but please remember that the follow-up is limited beyond 5 years, and you should discuss this with the patient. Then about the toxicity and quality of life, they talk about an increased risk of acute GI toxicity. They talk about it as a small increased risk, but the risk is there. Dr. Shankar also talked about it a while back. And they talk about how physicians should discuss the limited follow-up beyond 5 years with the patients. So what about ultra-hypofractionation? Since hypofractionation is the motion, so has to be a slide on ultra-hypofractionation as well. So this is the key question 3, where they talk about, yes, ultra-hypofractionation can be offered, but it is very conditional because the quality of evidence is moderate. We all know and should know that ultra-hypofractionation, i.e. SBRT, has only the retrospective data in place. This is statement key question 3B, where they talk about, for intermediate risk prostate patients, only treated as a part of clinical trial or multi-institutional registry. Please don't. And for high risk, they have really, retracted. That does not offer, suggest that we do not offer hypofractionation, and, suggested outside of clinical trial. This is another way of saying that, it is not the norm. Please do it as a clinical trial, because it's not ethical to do it otherwise. So we come back to our topic, So is it clear? So is it clear to my friends and seniors now that hypofractionation is not the norm? The same paper talks about how moderate hypofractionation holds potential advantages of convenience and resource utilization. So there are 3 legs holding this argument of hypofractionation. One is science, second is convenience, and third is resource utilization. So I found a very interesting paper. Is hypofractionation really such a panacea? I need a paper to talk about it. So I found a very interesting paper which was published in an Elsevier journal, Reports of Practical Oncology and Radiotherapy, which is about choosing between conventional and hypofractionated prostate cancer. This is a result from a shared decision-making tool. These authors, what they wanted to do was to evaluate the patient choice. So the most important thing which we sometimes talk about, patients would like to choose hypofractionation because it's easy and fast. So they wanted to evaluate that objectively. And for that, they designed a decision aid. And this is how the decision aid looked like. This is a paper, very simple paper. And since this can be a little difficult to focus, I have cut it down into different parts. And here I'm going to focus it. This is the upper part of the paper. And what they've written is based on several studies. There are two options, left side 45 treatments, right side 20 treatments. And no matter what you choose, you are going to be cured in 5 years. You're going to be alive in 5 years. The chance of side effects is 5 years. So this is as per the ASTRO guideline, ASTRO AUA, and as per science. This is not wrong. Indeed, there might not be a sting in the tail insofar even as the outcomes are concerned, but science is science. What about the difference in treatment options? The left one takes 2 months, the right one takes 1 month. The left one, you have a chance of being cured at 10 to 15, the right one has 5. And, they've also talked about bowel side effects. I'm going to use my pointer, 31% chance, but then it gets resolved. On the right side, hypofractionation, 42% chance. What we talked about, minor change, not relevant, and 42% chance, and it resolves within a month or two. Indeed, it looks minor to all of us scientists sitting over here. And then they talk about what is uncertain. We do not know whether the chance of cure is same after 5. We don't know whether the chance of being alive is same after 5. And what we have already highlighted, that the relevance of this data is 5 years. And this is about, you can discuss with your doctor and everything else. So what are the results? So I'll talk about the statistically significant results. The patients more than 75 years of age, about 47.8, about 50% patients chose hypofractionation. Now, we will think immediately that, okay, old patients, easy convenience, they want it done quicker, and that's the reason. No, most of these patients chose hypofractionation because they don't care what is happening after 5 years. Which brings me to the result of less than 75 choose, only 25% choosing hypofractionation because they care. And this is where there is a need to communicate about the limited follow-up data. I mean, to you, it may not be important, but for the patient it is. And also about the uncertainty about the endpoint of biochemical relapse-free survival, which is what most of the hypofractionation data is based upon. Then we talk about these patients who had any baseline GI symptoms. Just see that those patients who had any baseline GI symptoms, only 14% chose hypofractionation. This is the importance of minor differences of toxicity. He had highlighted it's minor, but the patients didn't want it anyway. They don't want their current situation to get any worse. They don't want to be making it worse in any way. So, and then of course, the distance made them choose hypofractionation. And herein are some non-significant outcomes, like which doctor has counseled and so on and so forth. So when left to the patients, not all of them choose hypofractionation. Indeed, for a resource, limited country like ours, the better usage of the machine is important. And for that, hypofractionation would certainly be relevant. But we are talking science here. Infrastructure usage is not science. So we come to conclusions. So these are the conclusions of the talk. The outcomes of conventional versus hypofractionated regimens are indeed similar. And with this, I would like to, take you to the, look at things from the other way. The argument about alpha by beta ratio, I feel, ends here because they are similar. Hypofractionation is not better than conventional.
You have 1 minute, Gagan.
Sure, it's done, sir. So the argument about alpha by beta ratio is ending here because alpha by beta ratio, if it is so relevant to hypofractionation, then at 5 years, it's not showing much of a benefit. Maybe later it will. And then certainly alpha by beta ratio should have a lot of role in making these decisions. But insofar, I would afraid not. Then moderately hypofractionated RT must be offered with sufficient counseling with respect to possible higher GI issues. we keep IPSS scores also in my practice. IPSS scores are very relevant because prostatitis also, and even cystitis gives a worse outcomes, but then we can keep it for some other discussion. Ultra hypofractionated results are retrospective, and please, that's not a norm. Patients need to be informed that hypofractionation is not the norm, and they need to make up their mind accordingly. And this randomized trial, which I presented last, kind of clears that out for us. Patients need to make an informed decision. And this is my thank you slide that, especially for the PGs, that this is a debate. And the idea of a debate is to bring out the deeper aspects of two point of views and to pop the hood, so to say. And the knowledge and science reigns supreme in our practice and in our academic world. And the only winner in a debate is the one that learns. So it's not that Dr. Shankar is not going to practice conventional or I'm not going to practice hypofractionated. We are not coming from two sides of the coin. We are just bringing you two sides of the coin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gagan. Now we give 1 minute to Dr. Shankar for rebuttal.
Very interesting way Gagan has highlighted the nuances of the trials, which is on which the evidence is actually based. But I just wanted to keep my friend Gagan little updated. I actually posted the message in the chat box as well. There is recently in this year ASCO, the updated results of the CHIP trial has actually been published, which is an 8-year follow-up data. It was a data which was published in 3,216 patients, all of whom had a node-negative T1 to T3A localized prostate cancer. And at the end of 8 years as well, the difference is more or less the same as what was seen at 5 years. And the hazard ratio was essentially for the biochemical and clinical failure for comparison between 60-day conventional schedule was kind of 0.85 less than 1. So again, this actually reiterated the fact that there is essentially the hypofractionated regimen, which is non-inferior. I think I'm sure Gagan also, we essentially give both the options. And definitely I'm not an ardent fan of hypofractionation. In fact, over the last 5 years, I would have done 5 or 10 prostate SBRT patients, that too also in a very, after keeping the patient very well informed that the data which is backing this is very less, all of non-randomized trials which you're seeing. But yes, definitely hypofractionation is something which I would consider specifically in the scenario of low and
okay, Dr. Shankar, your time is over. This is now over to Dr. Gagan for the rebuttal. Dr. Gagan, please.
Yeah, so very nice, Dr. Shankar, very nice update. And indeed, I feel that when the trials will be done with the power of not non-inferiority, but to try and prove some superiority with a better power and with a different primary outcome, we will probably get better results. The idea is to bring out to highlight or to argue against the basic motion of the house that it is not the norm. That is the only argument that I'm making. I'm certainly not saying that hypofractionation should not be done. I'm very clear about it. Hypofractionation is here to stay and will find its way in our practice more and more, I would say.
Thanks. Then again, you are supporting me as well.
Yeah, sure. I always support that.
Yeah. So the moot point is we have to discuss all the options with the patients and then be very vocal and candid about it. And then allow the patient to take a decision which is realistic.
Okay.
Thank you so very much.
No game fixing, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gagan. Any comments from the audience?
Please, sir, please go ahead with your comments.
Okay, I welcome Dr. Manoj Gupta. Dr. Manoj, you are there?
Yes, I am there.
Okay, any comments about the radiobiological basis? What is better? Because they say it doesn't matter. One of the speakers said it doesn't matter in carcinoma prostate.
So basically, if you take the precedence of breast cancer, right? where now it is the standard of care, hypofractionated radiotherapy, and the rationale behind using hypofractionated radiotherapy is based on alpha beta ratio. So no doubt Gagan is also right that we don't have long-term result in case of prostate, while in breast we have long-term result. So naturally, until we have a long-term result, though the philosophy is based on radiobiological principle, but unless we have long-term result, we cannot make it as a norm or as a standard of care right now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Manoj. There is no doubt when a patient wants minimum treatment, and over the years, all the treatments, whenever minimum treatment is possible, that is being done, whether it is for surgery, as we have seen in carcinoma breast, right from the supraradical mastectomy, we have come back to our conservative surgery. So same way in radiation therapy also, the patients are going to prefer minimal treatment. But that needs a lot of confidence, lot of backup data, and quality control. And for the time being, I think it is not yet the norm, but a time is in future, a time is going to come when we would be more confident in giving hypofractionation, and this would become the norm. Dr. Manoj, do we have to give the decision jointly, or we have to give it individually?
Yeah, you can give your decision, then I will.
I think both the speakers, they are presented very well, and more or less it would have been a tie. Though I am convinced that at present it's not the norm, but I would say that Dr. Gagan is the winner. The presentation was almost same quality for both the speakers, but Dr. Gagan kept the time. So because of that, I give him the more marks. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay. So at the end, science should win. That's more important, because when we are discussing.
So thank you very much. My comment is that, it was a very decent debate. Both the participants were very decent and acknowledged each other's effort. That is very good in this debate. Dr. Shankar really made his case based on, randomized trial which were published in last 3, 4, 5 years. And he was right when he says that hypofractionated radiotherapy is coming up gradually. But at the same time, Gagan Saini, made his point based on guidelines which are available as of today. And, based on guideline, it is true that it is not the standard of care as of today. But here I would like to say that, in science, it's an ongoing process. And whenever, we start something new, it's something like a journey. So naturally, we have started our journey in the direction of hypofractionated radiotherapy. And initial journey is very, very pleasant. But right now we are in the midway. And unless we have long-term data, long-term results supporting the short-term results, we cannot make it as a norm. So as far as the decision for the winner is concerned, I think both are winner. In fact, science is the winner in this case. And I congratulate both of the participants. Thank you very much for making it very, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, judges. Are we having Professor Shalin Kumar also with us?
No, he is not there. No, he is not there. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, judges, and thank you, speakers, for the exciting debate. Now we are having the second talk of this evening, and we have our star speaker for the second talk. And let me first invite the chairpersons for the talk, Professor Shelly Hukku. Professor Shelly Hukku is the chairman and senior consultant radiation oncologist at BLK Hospital, Delhi. Professor Satyajit Pradhan is the director of Homi Bhabha Cancer Hospital, Varanasi. And Dr. V. Srinivasan is our ICRO secretary and head of radiation oncology, Myote International Hospital, Chennai. So now I request the chairpersons to start the session.
So shall I introduce, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, please.
Now we are moving on to brachytherapy, and I saw this one nice quote that these people have put for brachytherapy. there is no greater value for the treatment of localized prostate cancer than brachytherapy. So with that quote, I start this session on brachytherapy, and Professor D.N. Sharma doesn't need introduction. He's one of our brachytherapy man, and he's done a lot of implants in prostate. And he's professor and head of radiation oncology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi. And he is also the vice chairman of Indian College of Radiation Oncology. So over to Dr. D.N. Sharma, and he's going to give you the topic, the promising role of brachytherapy in prostate cancer from early lesion to recurrent lesion. Over to you, sir.
Can you see the slides, Dr. Srinivasan?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Am I audible? My voice is clear?
Okay. Yes, sir. Okay. Looking great also.
Okay. Thank you very much. Respected chairpersons, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. And thank you, Manish, and thank you, Muniz, and thank you, Redon Conclave, for giving the opportunity to propel the brachytherapy treatment in prostate cancer. So I will not leave this chance to encourage and motivate the people who wants to do brachytherapy. So my topic is the promising role of brachytherapy in prostate cancer, early lesion to the recurrent lesion. Many people have doubt on the prostate brachytherapy. Many criticize brachytherapy, saying that the clinical practice of brachytherapy is declining. The prostate brachytherapy is very good, but it's a dying art. And some say that, some foresee that the prostate brachytherapy is going to be obsolete in near future. And some say that prostate brachytherapy has no future. Well, these are genuine questions to some extent, but I'm going to convince the critics that the brachytherapy is still the treatment in prostate cancer, and it is very much alive. And if you do brachytherapy for prostate, you will get the results, very good results, excellent results. The only thing that you have to do, you have to practice brachy for see the results, This was an article published in Green Journal about a year back, not year, in fact, 6 months back. And this was from the Canadian authors, and they had the same doubt that is prostate brachy a dying art? And they did a survey in their own country, and they just wanted to see the trend of the prostate brachytherapy in their country, So they had various treatments. These are the various treatments offered to the patients of prostate cancer. And this survey spread over the period of 10 years, 2007 to 2017. And if you can see there, the top bar, which reflects the prostatectomy of the surgery, is more or less the same. In fact, it is declining. The surgery is declining over the last decade, If you see the bottom, the black portion of the bar, in 2007, it was hardly 1%. That reflects the EBRT plus the brachy boost. And in 2007, it was just 1%. And if you see 2017, it is around 10%. It's maybe more than 10% now. So it has grown 10 times in the frequency of the treatment adopted for the prostate cancer. So the people who think that it is declining or it is dying, I think this refutes or that claim that prostate brachy is a dying art. It is not. It is still an alive art. And if you see the monotherapy, that is also still more or less the same. It is not declining. So if you see the prostate monotherapy brachy and the brachy boost, they both are very much alive. And if you, in particular, the brachy boost is growing, at a very fast speed in some of the countries where prostate is very common. So another article which titles that excessive wait list and delays to treatment with low dosage brachy predict an increase of recurrence and metastasis in the intermediate risk prostate carcinoma. Now, I'm not going to say the details of this article. This is just to show that there is a wait list for the low LDR seed brachytherapy for prostate. And this is again from the Canadian authors. So if some particular treatment is not very popular, why should be there a waiting list? So therefore, this reflects that if there's a waiting list for this country, and in this article, they've cited that the waiting list was as high as 5 months for LDR brachytherapy. So treatment, which has a wait list, in itself signifies that it is the treatment which is very much alive. And it again refutes the claim of the people that prostate brachytherapy is declining. This was just to convince the critics that it is a dying art, it is like declining. So if you want to see the potential of brachytherapy in prostate, you must see this diagram. And if you see this prostate, which is very closely packed, tightly packed in vicinity of the rectum and the bladder. And for these kind of targets, where the target is influenced by the bladder filling and the rectal filling and rectal emptying and all that, you know, the sensitivity of the treatment delivery is very critical, because if the target moves with the OR movements, then you can miss the entire target, and you can have the high toxicity and you can miss the target as well. You know, in such scenarios, brachytherapy has the best results, because all these kind of scenarios, they do not influence the brachytherapy treatment. It is highly accurate. It is like 4D treatment. It doesn't matter whether the bladder is full or empty, rectum is full or empty. It doesn't matter. For brachytherapy, it is the highly conformal treatment. So in such scenarios, the brachytherapy scores over all of the techniques, including the proton beam therapy. Now, suppose you don't have brachy and you offer the various EBRT, sophisticated EBRT techniques, which we have nowadays, like IMRT, SBRT, proton therapy, and then of course, to tackle the movement of the prostate, you have to have a gating or a tracking or a 4D treatment, you know. Now, all these looks fine, but they're very time consuming. We all know that when you plan a patient with either SBRT or IMRT, you consume a lot of time. And if you have like IGRT or all these gating techniques, then that comes at a cost. The more you add, the more is the cost. And then you require a very stringent quality assurance for all these additions for countering the movement of the prostate. And it requires a very high maintenance for all these equipment. And we must remember that more you add, more is the chances of error. So therefore, it is a very error-prone exercise. If you do not do a good QA or good maintenance, then the same treatment, which is very good, can be very highly hazardous. And then you add a little bit of hydrogel to increase the space between the prostate and the rectal wall, even though we call the VMAT proton very sophisticated treatment delivery methods, but then you add the hydrogel to increase the space between the prostate and the rectal wall, and it just adds few millimeters to increase the space, you know. So that again complicates your treatment delivery. And then you add the gold fiducial markers. You put at least 3 fiducial markers if you want to do the IGRT for the treatment, for the accurate treatment. So in my opinion, if you put 3 seeds, put few more and your treatment is complete. I mean, with the prostate brachy. But anyway, if you put 2 or 3 seeds, how can you call that all the treatments are invasive? They are also invasive treatments a little bit, you know. So all these treatments, which are called sophisticated, they are very complex in nature. While in brachytherapy is very simple. You just have to take the patient to the operation theater and put either the seeds or SDR brachytherapy. Planning is also not very complex. It's very simple, and deliver the treatment just 1 or 2 fractions, and that's it. So it consumes very less time. It is very cost effective, which I enumerated here. And it's an excellent dosimetry. It's by nature, it's an 4D treatment. And in the country like India, where we struggle for finances, you know, the brachytherapy, I will call it is financially conformal treatment. Although it is invasive, I agree it is invasive, but it's very minimally invasive treatment, you know. So that shouldn't be a deterrent for doing the prostate brachytherapy. Now, to further convince that brachytherapy is a most conformal treatment for the prostate treatment, this is just one study which was published in Red Journal in 2014, and the authors tried to compare the various possible options for the prostate irradiation. First one, the VMAT, which is considered very good. Many people are doing it, you know. So in this, if you see the first picture, the dosimetry is very conformal. The prostate is being covered very nicely, but then you have a spillage outside the pelvis. Although it's a low dose, but still it's a concern. So you have a bit of problem here because of the spillage. Then you have the intensity modulated proton therapy, which many people strive to get this treatment. This is a dosimetry for the IMPT, and you see the dosimetry is much more conformal than your VMAT. But again, you have at the entry points, you have some spill of the dose, you know. That's again a concern. And then you pay 30 to 40 lakh rupees for this kind of treatment. And your intensity modulated carbon ion therapy, if you see the right-hand side top picture, this is again much better than the IMPT in the sense that you know, the dose deposition is very dense in the prostate. As you can see, the red dose color was, but you again have a problem of the spillage at the entry of the beam, so although it is better than proton, but again you have some spillage of the dose outside the PTB. And low dose rate seed brachytherapy, which is much better than the all other X-beam techniques. And if you see the dose spillage, which is only in the vicinity of the PTB, but not out the pelvis or up to the skin, So it is far better than your VMAT, IMPT or IMRT. Then the last technique, the technique which the authors tried to compare was the high dose rate brachytherapy, which is of late being practiced quite a bit in the many centers. If you see, the dosimetry is further better because you have the optimization tools and you can further sharpen the dosimetry. And so if you see from the LDR, the dosimetry is much better, So this is just to show that even though you have proton, carbon ion, VMAT, and the other techniques, the brachytherapy is still the best conformal treatment for the prostate cancer because of the close vicinity of the organs like bladder and rectum. It's just one study published in NEJM 2016. I will not go in detail to literature because we don't have that much time. So it was just a 10-year outcome of the various treatment options for the prostates, including surgery and the radiotherapy for localized prostate cancer. The survival is probably more or less same with all the techniques, but if you see the erectile dysfunction, it was the best outcome with the brachytherapy. If you see the blue line, and followed by the EBRT and followed by the worst was with the surgery. So again, brachytherapy gives a very good quality of life in terms of the erectile function. So just to give you a small overview of, in brief, that brachytherapy in prostate cancer can be offered in different set of patients, including the early or low risk patients, including the high risk advanced cases, and even if patient fails post radiation, then you can still offer the brachytherapy for the recurrent cases. So again, as the title says, brachytherapy is for early, for locally advanced, and for recurrent prostate in different formats. If patient has a low risk or intermediate risk, select few patients with intermediate risk can be taken for monotherapy, which means brachy alone is sufficient for them. And if patient is somehow not eligible for monotherapy, then you can always combine EBRT and brachy as a boost. And if patient is recurred after post-RT, if it's a small recurrence, then you can even do focal therapy also, which is possible with brachytherapy. So this is the role brachytherapy plays in the different group of patients. There are some of the absolute contraindications for brachytherapy, like pre-existing rectal fistula, medically unsuited for anesthesia, and if some patient doesn't have the proof of malignancy. And these are some relative content like high pubic arch, which of course we tackle with a high lithotomy position, then medial lobe hypertrophy, or any other technical contraindications, for example, improper lithotomy or anything, So these are the relative contraindications. The two basic types of brachytherapy for prostate cancer, I will not go in details. One is the seed brachytherapy. We'll not discuss much because we don't have seed in our country, although there are hardly 1 or 2 centers use it very infrequently. So this is not widely practiced in our country. High dose brachytherapy is coming very fast. Of course, not in India that way, but we are doing at our center. A few other centers are doing the high dose brachytherapy, but it has a very good potential for the prostate cancer. So these are the two basic types of brachytherapy. There are various guidelines if you want to practice the brachytherapy, like ABS guidelines for high dose brachytherapy published in 2012. Then ABS guidelines for boost brachytherapy for high-risk patients where you have to combine EBRT and brachy. So I will not go in details, but you can follow these if you want to practice brachytherapy. But I would say prostate brachy is very simple. Contrary to the most people think that it is very invasive, it is skill-based, it is very complicated. If you do it, it's simple. If you don't do it, then of course it is very complex. But in my opinion, it is very, very simple. Let me explain that why it is simple. The prostate is anatomically accessible. You can do a PRI examination, you can do ultrasound to visualize very clearly. So it is not that organ which is deep inside the body, or it is not accessible. So it is very much accessible. Then you have a truss guidance which can visualize the prostate very well, and you can see the needles also there. So your truss guidance, unlike in head and neck brachytherapy or lung, where you don't have the ultrasound guidance. So it's simple,
Sir, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, fine. Then it's a small tissue to be implanted, unlike your cervix where you have to put like 20 or 25 needles. Here you just have to put like 8 or 10 needles and that's it. So it's small tissue implanted, and it's a silent malignancy. Even if you commit 1 or 2 small errors, the prostate patients live long enough. and they hardly patients die with prostate cancer. So these are, in my opinion, it's a very simple practice. This is a simple technique which I follow at my center. This is what you need for prostatectomy. First of all, you need a patient for doing the prostatectomy. Then you need a template, and you need a truss machine for doing the process. This is how the patient is made to lie down in lithotomy position. Nowadays, the ultrasound machine is very simple. It just looks like a laptop in which we have software for the ultrasound. So it is very handy. It is very portable. This is how the Foley's catheter is put well above into the urinary bladder so that it floats, and you don't puncture the Foley's bulb with the help of needles. This is how you see the ultrasound images of the prostate during the implant, and you can see the medial and the right and left border, upper and lower. And this is my simple technique. If you don't have a ultrasound superimposed template for that, put two LP needles on the two little edges of the prostate and mark with ink. And then similarly, like I can see in this, yes, this is how the two needles LP needles are put, and you can see in the ultrasound where the little edge of the border of the prostate. And then you can similarly the upper and the lower, you can mark like a square, and then you can put the template there and fix it with the help of stitches, so it doesn't move, Now, if you put the implant in this territory, it is not going to be outside the prostate, and it will definitely cover your prostate. So this is just one way to conformally implant the prostate with the simple techniques which I follow, And then you put the needles through the various holes, avoiding the urethra. Urethra is the only critical structure for the prostatectomy, which you can very well visualize on the ultrasound. With the Foley's catheter is very well visualized, so you can avoid the urethra. Rest is fine. This is one article which was published where regarding dosimetry, some people are trying only 19 grain 1 fractions SDR brachytherapy, but that has not shown good results. So I would recommend 13.5 grain 2 fractions is the ideal if you want to do the SDR brachytherapy as a monotherapy.
The possible to conclude, sir?
Prostate cancers. Okay, last slide. This is last slide. Okay, fine. Seed, I'm not going to go in details, but usually we can deliver 145 to 150 grain with the help of seed brachytherapy, which you can't deliver with any other technique. And again, we have EVS guideline for seed brachytherapy, which people can go through if they want to practice. Just to conclude, brachytherapy is used as a monotherapy for low-risk patients, boost for intermediate and high-risk patients, and salvage for the recurrent case. So it is for all kind of patients you can practice brachytherapy. Provides excellent local control, preserve the sexual functions, unlike surgery and EBRT. It is very cost-effective. In a country like India, we need these kind of treatments because they are not very costly treatments. And I would say the prostate brachytherapy has a very good potential. What you just need to do is to perform the brachytherapy to get the results. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a very nice presentation, sir. I would like to welcome Huppu Saab to say a few words.
So good evening, everybody. Dian, it was quite a good lecture, and you are one of the few, performers of prostate brachytherapy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now we all know, you see, it is, cannot be emphasized more that brachytherapy is the most conformal treatment available. It can be used as a primary treatment. It can be used very effectively as a recurrent or re-radiation. Now, the problem of prostate brachytherapy is that, of course, a lot of people use seeds, and then, of course, the afterloading things. And America, where, prostate cancer was very high in incidence, proposed the use of iodine and palladium seeds. And it was so popular that when I was in 1994 with Dr. Nori in New York, there were 4 or 5 cases for seed implant every day. And it's like, quick, for 20 minutes, they were out of the OT, implanting seed. And the physicists were so efficient that, now, unfortunately, what happened was that when I came back, I was so enthused that I wanted to start that, but seeds were not available. And to get seeds in a government hospital in Lucknow in SGPGI was, out of bounds. At that time, we did not have, we had a Ralstrom, which was the brachytherapy with cobalt sources, so that's not possible. And over a period of time, the enthusiasm waned. But, you were trying to emphasize that it is not declining, but I do not agree with that. And, you know, if about 100 participants which are there in the present meeting, if you ask each one of them, probably 5 or not more than 10 must have seen brachytherapy being performed in prostate, or they are doing it. So it is actually declining. In Canada, you know, you presented 2 papers from Canada. Canada is a different country altogether. And, you know, the waiting period depends on a lot of things, the resources and the, you know, thought process of the doctors. In Canada, if you see, prostate has the longest waiting time because they think that it's a slow growing tumor. If you see the waiting times of breast cancer, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, it is very quick. So Canadian data is, you know, flawed from that point of view. Now, brachytherapy, you see why it is declining. There are reasons for that. Robotic surgery was not there. Now, robotic surgery has come. It is a big competitor for brachytherapy as monotherapy in early prostate cancer. And in 2010, robotic surgery was being practiced. This is American data because Indian data is not there. In 60% of the patients, whereas earlier it was in about 45% of the patients. Now, the US data for brachytherapy of prostate cancer says that in 2010, only 8% patients received prostate brachytherapy. And in 2002, that is 8 years earlier, 17%. And if you look at the data of 1990s, it was probably much, much higher. The second reason is that the external beam has become sophisticated. IMRT, IGRT, SBRT is available everywhere. And so people are thinking that it is easier to use that rather than going for brachytherapy. And as I said, problem of seeds, of course, HDR is available everywhere. The third reason, of course, is basically an American reason because the reimbursement for IMRT and IGRT is much higher than brachytherapy, so they don't use it. In prostate, in India, you know, it is gradually declining because the centers are not using it and the students are not exposed to it. So the students, when they become consultants, have never seen a prostate brachytherapy case. So, you know, when a case comes, oh, haath pair phul jate hain, they cannot do it. So it is our fault, seniors, that we have not done it and the juniors have not seen it. And that is why it is very difficult to bring it back. But I think the effort should be made because brachytherapy is an excellent method of treatment. And if it declines and disappears, it is not we who will lose, but it is our patients who will lose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the nice comments. I think we are running short of time, so we'll move on to the next talk and over to the organizers. Thank you, Dr. Manish, and thank you, Dr. Manish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, chairpersons, and thank you, Professor Shaurya Sharma, for the inspiring talk. And it is always a privilege to listen to Professor D.N. Sharma. Now we have our...
Thank you, Sayan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's the pleasure is all mine. So now we have a panel discussion on adjuvant versus salvage treatment in locally advanced prostate cancer. And to start the panel discussion, I invite the moderator of the panel, Dr. Kaustubh Talapatra. Dr. Kaustubh Talapatra, please.
Yes. Thank you, organizers. Thank you, Dr. Manish. Thank you, Dr. Sayan. And I think we are short of time, so we'll keep the panel discussion very crisp, just 20 minutes. That's what I have been asked to. I'll invite the panelists. I think they can just affirm that they are there. Dr. Rakesh Kapoor. Dr. Rakesh Kapoor is there?
No, he's not there.
Dr. Deepak Abrol?
Yes, I am here.
Dr. Sridhar PS?
He is there.
Dr. Kinjal?
Yeah, I'm here.
Dr. Gautam Sharma?
He's there.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Haresh?
I'm here.
He's there, right? Yeah. Dr. Haresh is there.
Okay.
Dr. Arpana Shukla?
Yes.
Yes. And Dr. PM Vada?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, right. Great. So Dr. Rakesh, just all of them are there. So let us straightway go to the definitions. What is adjuvant or salvage radiotherapy? This question is to Dr. Maybe Kinjal or Priyambada. Define anyone, any of you?
Yeah, I'll take it. Kaustubh, thanks. Yeah. So no, whenever you talk about an adjuvant radiotherapy for any primary sites, we look at the high risk factors.
Daniel will be very crisp because I have the time allotted to us is only 20 minutes. So just
yes. So you give adjuvant radiotherapy to high risk factors, and you usually give it, like when you talk about prostate, we usually give a adjuvant radiotherapy within like 4 to 6 months, maybe up to 1 year. That is an adjuvant radiotherapy. And a salvage radiotherapy is a situation where patient has already had a biochemical failure, and then you are giving a radiotherapy. That is called a salvage radiotherapy. So that is.
Can you talk about early salvage? Is there a concept of early salvage radiotherapy?
Yes, Dr. Kaustubh. So the concept of early salvage came from two papers, one from Stephenson et al. And one from Tendulkar et al., where they showed that earlier the radiotherapy is done, that is lower the PSA at the time of radiotherapy, the better is the outcome and the biochemical control. So the early salvage is generally considered at a pre-RT PSA level of less than 0.4.
Great. Okay. So when we talk about decision making, so maybe Dr. Deepak can run us through this slide. Dr. Deepak, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Yeah. So do you agree with this slide? Do you think this is a crisp slide? When you do not have a risk factor, you follow it up. If you have persistent detectable PSA, you do adjuvant radiotherapy plus minus salvage ADT. And if you have an undetectable PSA but high risk feature, you do adjuvant radiotherapy. Do you agree with that, Dr. Deepak?
Exactly. It's very aptly put in this slide that when adverse features, pathological features are adverse, like positive surgical margins or extraprostatic extension and seminal vesicle invasion, these are the features when adjuvant RT can be done. But within a few more slides, I think you will come on to the comparing it with salvage also. But right now, this slide is very aptly put in.
Right. So this is the Astro AUA guidelines, and this is talking about the high-risk features in the adjuvant radiotherapy. So Dr. Haresh, some light on the high-risk features on adjuvant radiotherapy. What would you consider as high-risk features?
The high-risk features basically include margin-positive disease, T3A or T3B disease, or lymph node positive disease. These are all high-risk features when we consider for adjuvant radiation. But there is an issue of whether to consider for adjuvant versus salvage. But whenever there is a grossly multiple margin positives, that will be the main indication for me to go ahead with adjuvant rather than salvage. Or else I will consider for a...
Right. So Dr. Haresh has correctly enlisted the adjuvant radiotherapy features, positive surgical margins, PT, that's a PT3, that is vesicle invasion. So much so about the ideal candidate for adjuvant radiotherapy. The other features which we need to keep on mind is reasonably good recovery of continence, longer life expectancy, and patients who understand potential pros and cons of the therapy. So, is there adequate evidence that adjuvant radiotherapy enhances or improves outcome as compared to observation? So, Dr. Sridhar, maybe you can move on to Dr. P.H. Sridhar. Sridhar, can you throw some light on this?
Yeah, see, there is evidence about that, like progression-free survival can be progressed. If you look at the overall survival, actually there is no much difference in terms of like addition of the adjuvant radiation is going to be make any difference. So one step backward, like it's the overall program, overall what you're looking in a low risk is a monotherapy is the one what we needed to look into for a patient perspective. Anytime if any of these features come into the picture, I feel there's a failure on the part of ourselves or the biology of the early assessment was become inadequate. So in these sequences, you're actually making up a patch-up work in where the patient is in a receiving end. Yes, in adjuvant settings where there's a node positive or in a margins positive disease, there is no comparison that, okay, actually probably we didn't pick up these early cases, these advanced cases, I put it as an early case and we operated it. And we are actually making a patch-up work of treating these cases to compensate for the whatever the things which has happened.
So that is a very valid point. Sorry. Yeah. So that's a very valid point. Advanced cases, that is T3As and T3Bs being operated, presume, I mean, because they may be going to the surgical departments first, and then they land up with us with high-risk features. And as Dr. Sridhar has very rightly pointed out, that we need to identify those high-risk features. Dr. Arpana Shukla, Dr. Arpana is there, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Dr. Arpana, we have had very large 3 randomized control trials, the RTOG, the URTC, the ARO, and you know, most of them have had good outcomes in terms of biochemical progression-free survival. The SWOG RTOG trial also had an improvement in overall survival. So based on this results, would you offer adjuvant radiotherapy for all patients with high-risk features, or only a select group of patients with high-risk features? I'm not talking about all patients. I'm saying, would you offer adjuvant radiotherapy to all patients with high-risk features?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and decision making, it depends on mostly the risk grade grouping of the patient and the number of risk factors. So if there is a PT3 patient with undetectable PSA post-op margins negative, and the PSA is undetectable, it is T3A, we can, even margin is focally positive, then this may be a candidate we can prefer for observation and salvage radiotherapy SOS. But if there are multiple margins positive, higher grade grouping, and most important thing is Gleason grade at the positive margins, and baseline PSA is more, then we can upfront consider for the adjuvant radiotherapy. So case selection is the key. And even that salvage radiotherapy is option for high-risk patient if they are very, very compliant and they do the regular PSA and the close follow-up. Because the reason being that it is not in any randomized trial that adjuvant radiotherapy is not improved the overall survival. So yes, at least 50% of the patient we can prevent the over treatment. But at the same time, we have to see the risk stratification. Like post-op also, it needs again a risk stratification to keep the patient for adjuvant versus salvage. Number of risk factors. So a majority up to half, 50% we can keep for salvage, and some we have to give adjuvant, like I have already discussed. So I think I'm clear. Higher grade grouping and
is the Kaustubh there? I think we.
Yeah. Hello.
I think we have lost a connection.
Yeah, we lost Kaustubh.
Okay, because now I think I have a. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. See, that's whenever we are, the moment if this stratification is done, like if you see even in the post-op setting, that we know either adjuvant versus like the salvage, overall survival is definitely not improved, either you early versus late. But actually, biochemical failure, biochemical recurrence is definitely like the duration is increased. So there is definitely a subset of patients requires a adjuvant or a salvage treatment. But yes, it is not able to change the overall survival.
Sridhar Costa here.
There are patient-related factors also.
Sorry, I lost my connection. So I have connected through my phone, I think. So that's okay. That does not matter. We'll continue the discussion.
Yeah.
Right. So Priyambada, quickly one word about the quality of life.
So
in patients who have received adjuvant radiotherapy.
Quality of life is also a very important factor after the tumor factors, as Dr. Shukla and Dr. Sridhar mentioned. The next important thing is in patient selection is the patient factor. And one of the main things we consider while taking up a patient for adjuvant RT is urinary incontinence. So if the patient is having a good post-surgery bladder function, then he is a better candidate to be taken up for post-op RT. Whereas those patients who have a lot of incontinence issues, it may be better to wait if the high-risk features are not that many. Having said that, the evidence did show that largely it was well tolerated. However, the patients who got adjuvant RT versus the wait and watch approach did have somewhat lower quality of life.
Right. So one quick word from Dr. Harish, Dr. Kinjal, and Dr. Gautam. Would you like to spare adjuvant RT in one subset of patient, and which will be your subset of patient?
Yeah, in a case of a T3A disease, which is focally or margin positive, in those cases, or T3B disease also, I mean, if the PSA is less than 0.2, I would generally would like to defer the RT for a salvage setting rather than adjuvant setting. Even though
right. Kinjal, any comment from you? Will you look at the PSA velocity? Will you look at the time to PSA failure?
Kinjal has some invitation somewhere else, so he has left.
Dr. Gautam, would you look at other factors like PSA velocity, time to PSA failure?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so those are also very
if the doubling time
factors.
is, if the PSA doubling time is, yes. So if the PSA doubling time is less than 3 months, so we have to give salvage radiotherapy to the patient, sir.
Right. That's a very good point, Dr. Deepak. Any other feature? Any other point? Where you
Dr. Kostav,
not give adjuvant and wait for salvage?
I just want to put in one word about the trials you were telling about the SWOG EORTC, and because you know there's an important point that these studies were actually flawed studies. You had already shown in the slide that is there adequate evidence that adjuvant radiotherapy improves outcome as compared to observation, and these 3 trials were regarding observation and not adjuvant radiotherapy was not compared with early salvage. So according to me,
so we will come to those studies. We will be coming to those studies. Right. So these are very important ASTRA-EO guidelines regarding salvage radiotherapy. So, you know, I think we should all go through, for the students' benefit, we should all go through these guidelines. There are 7 points. They have been talking about salvage radiotherapy. Some of them are clinical principles. Some of them are grade 3, grade C evidence. Some of them are grade 1, level A evidence. And I think all students should be going through them. I think the slides can move on if someone is here. Can you just move the slides? The organizers, just move the slides. Keep moving, keep moving. Keep moving, keep moving. Keep moving, yes. More. Yes, keep moving. Keep moving. Yeah. That's one slide earlier. One slide earlier. Yeah, right. So we have very less time. It has been cut short to 20 minutes and the technical age. So there is some retrospective data supporting salvage radiotherapy. How early is early in salvage? So how early is early, Sridhar, in salvage? How early should we start salvage?
See, actually, the PSA doubling time, the moment the PSA velocity, like what you are talking about, 2 consecutive raise in the PSA PET scan. Usually in my practice, any post-operative treatment, post-operative cases where there is a doubtful, we always get a PET PSMA as one of the things. Up to anything more than 2, you will definitely see a lesion. So if the margin is positive, and if the node positive, definitely we are going to give the like including the hormones and the radiation. If there is a T3A, no, I don't. I prefer to wait. I prefer to give a post salvage treatment rather than an early adjuvant, because I believe in what single modality should be good enough to take care. In a PSMA PET scan, if you see a lesion which is present in any focal lesion, go and treat only that area. I don't want to give it to any other areas in these settings, and wait and watch if you identify a lesion. So in salvage,
the only issue will be sometime early salvage will not, early recurrences when your PSA is less than 0.2. Yeah, it will not be picked up on the PSMA PET.
Correct. If in those cases, if monotherapy, the next adjuvant treatment as a salvage radiotherapy alone versus addition of ADT is the one what makes a difference. I prefer to, in these cases, when I discuss with the patients, if they are more panic of addition of the ADT, I prefer to have early salvage in these cases rather than adding the ADT along with the salvage treatment.
Right. So, Dr. Aparna, do you think it's a team effort?
Yeah. Every case should be discussed with the multidisciplinary team, radiation oncologist, urologist, and patient should be a part of decision making because quality of life issues and compliance are there with the patient. So it's a team decision.
Dr. Haresh? Dr. Haresh, are you there? Dr. Haresh?
Hello, yes.
Yeah. So Dr. Haresh, do you think the point that we have written that androgen deprivation therapy before surgery will make early salvage impossible, and we should vehemently, aggressively lobby for that the usage of androgen deprivation therapy before surgery, reckless usage should be stopped.
That should be stopped. That should be stopped. That will affect with the proper staging and further treatment. That should not be.
No, it's a blanket treatment. Making a low risk.
I know, I understand that, but I think we also need to educate our counterparts. Priyamvada, do you think 0.2 is a right cutoff?
0.2 is a better cutoff now, given the recent trials of Radical-SARTI, RAVES, and the GETUP trial, which used Radicals actually used a cutoff of 0.1. So while we rarely see patients with 0.1 practically in our OPD,
Right. So basically the idea is to start as early as possible and do not delay very long. Then you have the fun is lost and it's no more early salvage then, right? And last question here is, can ADT be added to salvage radiotherapy? Anyone can take that. There is enough evidence coming up. Should androgen deprivation therapy be added to salvage radiotherapy?
Yes, it can be.
Yes.
In certain high-risk cases with node positivity, grouping 4 or 5, say rise is more, then it can be coupled with salvage, be given at least for 18 months to 24 months.
Dr. Gautam, any last comment from you?
Yeah. I will also go along with this thing that ADT should be added and for at least 2 years.
Dr. Deepak, any last comment?
I think 2 years is the right time period for this, and ADT should be added.
Dr. Aparna, any last comment?
Yeah, so ADT, it is requires a judicious use because it is also its side effects. But if the patient falls into high risk category, then we should add it. And in certain high risk cases, the evidence say we can add albuterol and prednisolone along with hormonal therapy in adjuvant setting also. So
Dr.
it's all
Priyamvada,
about
one
the
quick
risk
comment.
stratification.
Last comment.
All about the risk stratification.
I would just like to say that practically in our OPDs, we use something called as Capra S4.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just saying that in our OPD, we use something called an Capra S4. This is a score which accounts for all the high-risk factors, including Gleason's. It is a combination of 6 factors. And if the patient scores 8 to 12, which is the highest risk, then we do adjuvant radiotherapy along with long course ADT. Whereas if the patient scores somewhere in the middle, then a shorter course of ADT along with either a salvage or an adjuvant in discussion with the patient is more appropriate.
Right. So last 2 comments from Dr. Haresh and Dr. Sridhar, and we'll conclude then.
Previously, we were not using the ADT with adjuvant or salvage settings, but with the results of the GETUP trial and the SPOT trial, more and more evidence is coming up to add ADT at least for 6 months with the adjuvant or salvage settings.
Right. Sridhar?
Yeah. So in a salvage setting, if there is anywhere in a recurrent setting or the Gleason score has more than 8, yes, the salvage adjuvant ADT can be added for like short course. But whenever there is a node positive, and that is a whole different story, 18 months, it becomes an higher stage. And if it is only biochemical recurrence and you are adding an addition to the salvage treatment, I prefer to wait for at least for 6 months to take a decision.
Okay. Deepak? Dr. Deepak?
Yeah, actually I had lost the connection.
No issue.
Hello?
Hello.
Hanji, Dr. Kaustav?
Yeah, Dr. Deepak, you are there?
Yeah, I am here.
Yeah. So do you finally believe, in conclusion, that we can spare some patients of radiation, at least 50 to 60% of them, if we take a good strategy of early salvage and not jump into adjuvant for all the patients with high-risk features?
Exactly, as you clearly shown in your presentation, that high-risk features with adverse pathological features, we should go for adjuvant. Otherwise, we should take over patients for early salvage.
Great. So I think we have had a nice panel discussion. The take-home points have been there. Radiation is important. We have to identify high-risk features. It cannot just be observation. Adjuvant therapy is important. And out of that adjuvant therapy, we need to pick out one set of patients who would not require radiation. And that is where the data is emerging. That, as Dr. Aparna had said, can happen with great case selection. So we should be very judicious about case selection. With hormone therapy, with salvage hormone therapy, the evidence is generating. Some say 6 months, some say 2 years, and we'll have clearer answers. But definitely hormone therapy helps, and we'll have clearer answers maybe in the next 3 to 4 years. But early salvage it is showing us the light of the day, and I think it is going to stay here with us, and that is what we are going to base our practice on. I thank the organizers. I thank all panelists for this wonderful panel discussion. Sorry for the technical glitch. I lost this thing, but at least we could connect over phone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaustav, and thank you all the panelists. It was a very nice discussion on a very, very important